Cardiac surgeon Dr. Carolyn Tyler is successfully able to revive a criminal from the brink of death. The thug had fatally shot a cop only a few hours ago and is also suspected of other prior murders. However, when he comes back to life, he begins to have visions from the afterlife. His visions help Dr. Carolyn to find the dead bodies of 5 teenage girls buried by a riverbank, but she is not sure who committed the crime. It all begins 4 weeks ago as Dr. Carolyn is called on to handle an emergency case. She arrives at the emergency room and learns that her patient is an 18-year-old honors student that was shot in a drive-by. Unfortunately, despite Carolyn trying all the traditional procedures, the teen begins flatlining. She goes out of protocol and orders one of the nurses to go get her some ice. Carolyn then keeps massaging the kid's heart while they cover his body in ice to try and slow the cardiac arrest. The surgeon even mutters a prayer in Latin over the patient's body. After a few more minutes of trying to revive the kid, Carolyn gives up and calls the time of death as 11:20. Feeling defeated, she begins to take off her gloves and mask, but before she leaves the room, one of the other doctors shout that they have a pulse. The gunshot victim seems to have returned from the dead. Carolyn heads out into the lobby and finds the intern, Zed, who had supported her decision about using ice. She compliments his presence of mind, but also reminds the intern that he must act faster. Shortly afterwards, Carolyn's ex-husband, Dr. Len Barlas, who is also a surgeon, corners her in the lobby. He says they need to talk about their daughter Sophie. He thinks that she needs to have a chat with her mother. Sometime later, the head of the hospital, Dr. Charles, pages Carolyn into his office. He reveals that internet tycoon Ivan Turing is considering making a huge donation to the hospital, but he has requested to meet with Carolyn, and not anyone else. Thus, later that day, Carolyn heads to Ivan's house to meet with him. He reveals that he is dying from terminal cancer and won't live to see the summer. Ivan, however, didn't call Carolyn to save him. He called her because he wants to know what will happen to him when he dies. Carolyn is confused, but the billionaire explains that he needs real proof of what happens after you die. And if Carolyn can deliver that proof, he will leave his $10 billion estate to her when he dies. Ivan himself has done a lot of research and even hands Carolyn a stack of files. However, Carolyn turns down Ivan's offer as she believes this whole thing to be fairy tale nonsense. She is about to leave, but Ivan reveals that he knows her son Will died in a car crash last year. He also knows that she nearly died in her own near-death experience during a tsunami rescue mission. Carolyn is shocked, and she demands to know how the hell he knows so much about her. When he refuses to reveal the source, she storms out. On her next shift, Carolyn heads back to the hospital and checks in on her gunshot patient. The boy tells her that when he was dead, he saw things. It was like he was up on the ceiling and could see his own body and the doctors working on him. Carolyn doesn't believe him, but he repeats the prayer that she was whispering under her breath when she was trying to bring him back to life. The next day, Carolyn takes Zed with her to meet one of the people in Ivan's files, a girl named Lily, who was in a coma for 5 days. When she woke up, she told her parents about the people from her family that she met in the other world or afterlife while she was asleep. Her parents explained that Lily never could have known those people because they died before she was born. A few days later, Carolyn goes to a nursing home to meet Ruth, Lily's granddaughter. The surgeon takes out some of the drawings that Lily gave her of the people that she met in the other world. One of them is a guy named Paw Paw, a tall man with a mustache. Ruth begrudgingly confesses that when she separated from her husband Bill for a few months, she went to a bar. There, she met a man, and as she was so upset with her husband, she slept with the boy from the bar. The boy was a soldier who was later deployed and killed in Vietnam. Ruth then reveals that Paw Paw is Lily's real grandfather. Moments later, when Carolyn goes back to the hospital, she learns that Lily was just brought in. Apparently, she has another blood clot from her meningitis. Carolyn rushes into the room, and Lily's parents tell her that they have opted not to get the surgery because there is a 70% chance that Lily won't survive. Carolyn argues that without the surgery, she will definitely die. Carolyn eventually convinces Lily's parents to let her do the surgery. After a long and arduous surgery, Carolyn and Charles remove the blood clot. Lily will live, but there is no guarantee that she will not have another clot. Few hours later, Lily wakes up and Carolyn asks her if she got to see anyone in the other world again. Lily tells Carolyn that the people in the other world told her not to talk to Carolyn about them anymore. Nonetheless, Carolyn pays Ivan a visit and agrees to work on his files and see if there is life after death. She, however, has a list of stipulations and demands. Ivan agrees to them. All he wants is Carolyn to include his protégée Janelle in her work. Down that week, Carolyn and her team are meeting with Luke, a man who is experiencing visions of his dead wife, Ellen. She seems to be interacting with him the entire time he's talking with them. Ellen was a photojournalist in top condition, but died suddenly of a heart disease. After her death, Luke flew up and scattered her ashes on a backcountry lake. We also get to know that Luke sees her, hears her, and smells her brewing coffee. That afternoon, Janelle and Zed tell Carolyn that Ivan is insisting they take the case of the man who appears to be stuck in the first stage of grief. Carolyn is annoyed, even more so when she gets back to the hospital to see Ivan poking around medical equipment under the guise of giving the hospital money again. In the meantime, Carolyn decides to continue looking at the case and visits the man stuck on his wife again. His dead wife is drawing him a bath upstairs while he and Carolyn chat. The latter dismisses the whole experience as some sort of hallucination. This prompts Luke to wonder if she has lost someone close in her life. When the surgeon doesn't answer, he correctly guesses it was a child. Luke then adds that the difference between the two of them is that he no longer feels the pain that she feels. Suddenly, the bath upstairs overflows and they rush upstairs. It appears like someone else turned the bath on, but Carolyn later reveals that she wants Luke to come in for a full psych evaluation. At the hospital, Carolyn talks to her husband and asks a rather strange question. She inquires about the people present in the hospital when their son passed away. She wants to know if he had seen an old lady with a green scarf during that time. It is revealed that Carolyn has lately been seeing this old lady everywhere. However, Len suggests such visions are usually memories tucked away in the brain that people want to forget. Things take a dark turn that evening as Carolyn sees Luke admitted in the hospital. He seems to be hurt. Someone has hit him on the forehead. He's certain his wife Elena is angry that he's been talking with another woman and says the surgeon should stay away. The following day, Carolyn runs into Peter Van Allen, a businessman who markets himself as a psychic. She learns that Ivan gets all his files from Peter, much to her annoyance. That evening, at home, Carolyn gets a text from an unknown address telling her to stay away from Luke. She is wondering who sent her the text when suddenly a fire starts in her trash bin. She rushes outside and finds a candle which she had earlier seen at Luke's house. A short while afterwards, she pounds on Luke's door, but he appears to have no idea what is going on. She demands a complete mental and physical evaluation, or she'll call the police. Luke agrees, as he cannot explain to the cops how his dead wife started the fire at his house. Few weeks later, Luke undergoes surgery, but explicitly warns Carolyn not to be in the surgery room. She initially agrees, but when Chief Surgeon Charles asks for help, she is forced to take part in the surgery. Right on cue, several electrical problems prohibit them from continuing. The surgery is eventually moved for later, as the electrical problems just don't stop. A few nights later, when Carolyn gets back to Luke's room, an alarm is sounded. We then get to know that Luke is currently on the roof. He is planning to jump off the building just to be with Ellen. Carolyn thankfully manages to talk him down and into surgery. She asks him to reconsider, saying all this could be Ellen's way of getting him the help he needs and not ending his life at all. That evening, the surgery takes place and Luke is vision-free after the whole process. He can now get his job as a pilot back and start all over again. The scene abruptly shifts, and we see several American soldiers under attack. Sergeant David is calling on his fellow soldiers to move forward when suddenly a private named Tommy is shot. However, we quickly learn that the scene is actually being retold by Daniel Powell, a psychologist. It turns out that Daniel's client, Liam, has been having these vivid dreams from the Korean War where he sees himself as Tommy. The only strange thing is that Liam wasn't even born when the Korean War was underway. However, Daniel believes that his client is experiencing emotions from his past life. It is then revealed that Carolyn and Zed are in the audience, listening to this whole presentation. Carolyn isn't impressed with the whole thing and even calls it nonsense. So, it comes as a surprise to Zed when she wants to talk with the psychologist when the presentation is over. It turns out she attended medical school with him and they're friends. While the two are having a conversation, Liam is confronted by a stranger. The latter accuses Liam of stealing the story from a book he was about to publish. The confrontation becomes so heated that the men start fighting and have to be separated by Daniel. Elsewhere at the hospital, Zed runs into someone he knows from his village in Kenya. He is encouraged to call back home as soon as possible, as everyone seems to be waiting for him for some reason. This is when we learn that Zed is apparently engaged with a girl back in Kenya. In fact, when he was a kid, his parents had promised to marry Zed to the girl. It is now clear that Zed actually doesn't want to leave the US and wants to do his residency in this very hospital. The scene then abruptly shifts, and we see Carolyn and Daniel are talking to the guy who attacked Liam. He introduces himself as Ryder and stands firm in his claim that he was about to come up with a graphic novel. Daniel, however, has an interesting theory. He thinks that this guy and Liam share a memory as they were in the same place at the same time. Thus, Daniel runs a hypnotic test on Ryder and asks him to look deeper into his earlier memory. They find a shocking truth. Ryder sees the same memory, but through the eyes of Sergeant David. They both fought side by side during the Korean War. A few days later, Liam and Ryder come for a joint hypnotic session. They go deeper in their minds together and eventually fall into this trance-like state. Both of them are transported into their earliest memory, the Korean War. Ryder was Sergeant David and was leading a group of US soldiers to the front line. However, they were attacked and Tommy got shot in the shoulder. David tried mounting an offensive while also looking for his comrades, but poor David also got a bullet to his chest and fell down on the spot. He soon died after confessing his love for Tommy. Back at the hospital, Zed calls his home in Kenya and talks to the girl he is engaged to. Instead of informing her that he has had a change of heart, Zed caves in and instead says he loves her. A few days later, Carolyn receives 2 emergency cases from a gunfight scene. There is a cop as well as a criminal named Mason, both of whom have been shot multiple times. She handles the cop, and despite multiple electrical cardioversions, the patient passes away. The thug who had shot the cop is also declared dead a few seconds later. However, just as the case is about to be shut down, Mason comes back to life. Carolyn immediately attends to him and sees that the criminal has a terrified look in his eyes. After a few days, the criminal's health starts to improve to a point where he can talk normally. Carolyn, who is still haunted by the look he had in his eyes, has a little conversation with Mason. She inquires what he saw that made him so terrified. Mason is reluctant to open up at first, but eventually realizes that this is his only chance to talk. Thus, he tells Carolyn about his near-death experience. Mason says he saw a young girl with brown hair and some kind of a uniform on. He, however, doesn't recollect anything after that. Following this, Carolyn tells Janelle to dig deeper into this case and find the girl from the criminal's description. It doesn't take them long to do so, as Janelle discovers a girl of that description. Apparently, a 17-year-old named Laurel Aries has been missing for the past 1 year. She has brown hair and had been wearing the uniform of the fast food joint she worked in when last seen. To pull out more information from the criminal, Carolyn asks for the help from the psychic Peter Van Allen. They together force the criminal to get deeper into his vision and reveal what he saw. Mason begrudgingly does so and says he saw the brown-hair girl drowning in mud somewhere near a river. This news is quickly given to the police, who find not just the body of Laurel Ares, but 5 other girls buried in the bank of a nearby river. Unfortunately, the blame of all the murders is placed on Mason, who is then shifted out of the hospital. Before he is taken, Mason yells at Carolyn and says that the real killer is still at large. The surgeon wants to question him more, but it is too late. He is shifted to jail. A few days later, Carolyn gets the news that Mason passed away due to a blood clot near his heart. Meanwhile, as the story comes to an end, we see an old woman wearing a green scarf in the hospital's elevator. This is the same kind of scarf that Carolyn keeps on seeing in her dreams.